Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the Winter Spring 2024 class, and this is our first session after break, or session 6. So we got some great questions here from Erica, and some great question, a couple of great questions from Shawani there. So yeah, really excited to go through that. And Shawani, I have just put a note there, and if you want to work on it as I start answering the first questions, if you can show me or quickly create a map of where the flooding is on the area, and we can get a sense of generally when that happens, what time of year, until generally when, or what the duration is. That'll be super helpful in answering the question.
Yeah, I have already shared the portfolio
Okay, great.
link.
And does that portfolio have like a map that shows the flooding?
Uh, uh, the slide of flood is not there, but I mean, it shows the base map and the other
Yeah.
maps.
So if you could,
Yes.
as I'm doing this, if you could just make a duplicate in maybe the water section of your existing base map and just like do a quick polygon overlay of where the flooding is, that'll help me to answer the question.
Okay, I just do that.
Perfect. Thanks.
Make
Okay. So starting us off here, um, just checking back in with Chana, we've got another little piece here about elephants, and I'll link to a great Thai project that's really focusing on human elephant coexistence. This is the cool thing about permaculture is you get a chance to learn about anything under the sun from the lens of how do we improve our interactivity with it. So nice to have that there for Chana. And then Erica has asked a question about beavers, which is a brilliant question. I think there's a little bit that's lost in translation, but I'll read it all the same. So from Chana here, question comes from my workplace, so it's not my site, but I guess it's related because others might interact with it. Situation on the map, stormwater catchment dams for sedimentation and removal of nutrients, stream to be protected to encourage the trout to stay and go play, and the beavers are thriving. I'd like so much to find another solution than to shoot them, which has been the approach so far. The beaver dams in the stream inlet to the eastern dam and build their lodges in the dam walls between the streams and the ponds. We've recently had to do a lot of work due to previous negligence and lack of timely attention, excavating lodges, mending dam walls, removing dam materials, no shooting, and of course, the sweethearts are back. Undisturbed territory in Beaver Paradise provided. I find no good information in Swedish, or just one example about using gabions. We'll come back to this beaver deceivers. Shooting is the common practice in Sweden. Any other tips on beavers, successful ideas, reinforced mesh on dam walls, tricks to direct the beavers to places where they could be okay or beneficial for humans and wildlife, sort of tricking them into settling in a place would do no harm. How much human disturbance would deter them? Anything beavers don't like to disturb the trout, upstream, downstream. I think it's hard to put the beavers to work for us in the stormwater ponds because the dams need to be accessible for careful excavation when saturated with sediment. Sediment that contains low doses but never less of heavy metals, PHA, PCB, and so on, very strictly regulated. Beavers have made attempts at the inlopp, but have had to be removed. It'd be fun to talk about beaver enthusiast designers. Are there any to crack this? How to let beavers lie here and at the same time take care of their dams and their function to prevent metals and nutrients from reaching the stream. Yeah, there's a great photo of their skill getting as tight as they can and then letting the wind take them down. So the questions I would ask Erica, because there's not enough information here for me to really comment beyond principle based, is what are the beavers specifically doing that is problematic? So it sounds like they're doing some damming, but at the same time, from the map, it looks like the dams that are there are pre-existing. So are they adding to the pre-existing dams? Have they created something extra? I'm having a hard time trying to find what the issue is. There's this thing about heavy metals, the fact that they're damming too much, which isn't allowing perhaps the flow and the flocculation and sedimentation. But generally for storm stormwater management and retention ponds, you don't have that to start off with in terms of heavy metal filtration. So yeah, I don't really know what the problem here is. Generally, when we look at beavers, the major issues is that what they'll do is they'll dam up these culverts. And the problem with that is if you dam up a culvert, then the road becomes the dam wall. And when this area totally fills up with water, it goes over the road and you lose the road. So in short, that's kind of the issue we find when we're working with beavers. But what these beaver deceiver flow structures really have shown, and this is all from a great slideshow by Skip of beaver deceivers, who named his company after the ubiquitous elements now that are used internationally. It's kind of like jacuzzi losing the name to jacuzzi because he made something so iconic. Basically, what we're doing is we're ensuring that the culvert itself has some sort of area that's protected with a vertical filter. And this is 6-inch fencing that has been epoxied so that way it doesn't rust and then degrade. A lot of wetlands are acidic. And the problem with acidic wetlands is that they'll degrade steel, they'll degrade tin, they'll degrade aluminum. Or pardon me, not aluminum. Tin was the other one I was thinking of. Steel, tin. It'll come to me. And so one of the things is you're using pressure treated wood, and you're working with stainless steel if possible, and then usually epoxied over top of. So basically what happens here is that even if the beavers dam this up and the water comes in, there's these two total free flow areas. So that way the water can still drain through there and get through this. So basically you're deceiving the beavers that where there's flow, which is where there is here, which is how they sense and understand and start to dam up, that they can come over here, dam all this up, and you'll still have flow through. So Skip has been doing this for a number of years. He's got a great presentation that I just quickly refamiliarized myself with. And it just really shows, this is another great example. And I imagine, and I'm not sure because I don't know exactly what Erica's situation is, but I imagine doing what's called a baited dam in front of some of these structures. So that way the beavers dam in these areas, and we can see that, I think it's up here. So basically what Skip does is he'll create these little areas that the beavers go, oh, this is a great place to start a dam. And they'll literally take that exact same area. You can see the same bridge here, and they'll dam up against it. And this then leaves the area below stream, which is what we're seeing here, below stream, to be able to take that overflow when and where it gets through that dam, because it's not perfect. It's always going to be a little bit of flow through, because the major issue here is culvert. So because I don't know what Erica's specific issue is, if it is indeed the culvert or not, I can't specifically speak to it, but I would imagine it would have something to do with the culvert issue, and then just making sure that you can create a structure that, one, has its drain not directly at the culvert, but besides the culvert. Two, has this box structure around it. And originally Skip was working with trapezoids, and he talks about how trapezoids made no sense. It was more expensive, more material, and wasn't as strong as a square. And so he moved to squares. And then you can see on both sides, everything has this 6-inch construction mesh, which is kind of the minimum size you want to use to keep away beavers. You're working with other types of aquatic rodents or mammals, then you usually have to use the 6-inch grid and overlap it. So that way it's now 3 inches, because the strength of it is such that you want to keep it within that same, instead of moving to a smaller diameter, but still the same mesh thickness or caliper. So I would imagine that would probably be a fair bit of what Erica was asking about. But again, there's not enough information within this one map, our different languages, for me to totally understand what it is. So that's what I can say about that. And then just generally that I used to joke with students that there was natural law and human law, and natural law got to bat first and last. So the beavers have always been this incredible mechanism within the landscape that will stop a low-lying area, stop it up, and for the least amount of effort, produce the most amount of wetland. And the great thing about wetlands is that they have the ability to weather droughts, and they have the ability to hold water as a sponge and slowly release. So there are these mechanisms that help to buffer times of drought, which are quite natural. So if you can, in any way, shape, or form, working with that natural law, working with that natural conversation to ensure that they have value there, and maybe design the space and place around the beavers first, instead of thinking that they're not going to come. The other thing that's important is the beaver you kill isn't the last beaver. So even though you shoot them, they're always going to come back. So a further long-term solution, one, potentially that acknowledges that the beavers have huge amount of values and the wetland protection, the hydrology protection they have. That would all be useful. I think we talked about all this. Open, acidic water. Oh yeah. And she talked about fish as well. So one of the things that a number of sites will do is they'll do fish ladders along with culverts that are higher than two other culverts. So in this situation, what it would look like is you would end up putting in lower culverts, which would be the culverts that the beavers would be after, and then a higher culvert for either fish or for other types of aquatic life to move up and pass and through these areas. Because beavers will also tunnel under roads and things of that nature. So it's good to have that as a as a as a relief valve, so to speak. Awesome. Okay. Shawani, let's get into your question. It's such a good one. All right. So I'm just going to move a few things around here so I can see what I'm doing. From Shawani, my question is about soil management on site. My site has heavy rainfall and yearly flooding, 4 to 5 months of quite dry season and strong overhead sun. The soil is almost 85% sand, 10% silt, and 5% to almost no clay. So from my perspective, looking at this, this is a highly erosive capacity. We have a soil that is mostly sand, so there's not a lot of binder of clay. And generally from the photos, because we worked quite a bit on your base map, I know that there's a number of areas that have been used for intensive agriculture. So we know also that there's not a lot of vegetation, and vegetation will start the flywheel of organic matter in the soil. So I know that that has issues. So my first, as I'm thinking this through from first principles, it's like heavy rain, mostly sand, highly erosive. So that means our strategies are going to start to be constrained. I realize that building soil may not be easy on my site, as site has slopes around, not very steep, but almost on 3 sides. Yearly flooding of land as normal as per locals. They say land gets filled with water up to 6 to 8 feet, and that water can stay for 24 to 36 hours or so, and the speed of flow of water is high. Northeast part, which is lower than the other sides, gets waterlogged 1 to 2 feet for 1.5 months or so. I think that if I try to manage my land by planting a lot of trees, mulching, adding regular manures, irrigating plants during the dry season, all this is going to be labor intensive and expensive. Okay, so question one, do you think every year I will have to manage the eroded soil? Are there any ways that I can retain moisture and nutrients in the soil, which can be more permanent solutions to soil erosion over further years? So at this point, we're going to go over to your base map here. And actually, I think you just said a chat. Maybe this will go right to the slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. So this is the area that's mostly flooded. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. That is, yeah,
Gotcha.
flooded and waterlogged for
And generally,
all.
in terms of these areas, which of these areas are you seeing the most amount of erosion?
Uh, the most amount of erosion is basically is all over the land. There is, I mean, the rocks seen. There is no topsoil, no top layer, and the rocks are seen everywhere. Small pebbles, small, big. Is
Gotcha.
that what you asked?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So basically, what happens is somewhere downstream, if I'm understanding this correctly, somewhere downstream. So this is upstream and this is downstream. So basically,
Yeah.
the water flow, as I understand it, is coming. Let me just grab an arrow here.
Is coming from the and I
Coming this
mean,
way and it's moving this way. Yeah.
no, the other way.
Oh, it's moving the other
It's
way.
yeah,
Really?
it's coming into the creek. If you, I mean, if you just move, uh, then you can. I have shown the direction of water flow. It's coming from this northeast direction through this creek and entering into the river. How do I?
Northeast
Uh,
direction. Okay, so
yeah.
so the water doesn't flow from up here down here.
No. Water is entering from this creek
It's
down
entering from this side and coming this way.
this side and yeah, and going to the that. It is passing through this land.
Okay, so it's coming this way.
Yes, and going
Okay,
into the river
all right.
overhead.
And this is the big river up here.
Yes, the
Okay.
big river goes.
Yeah, so basically what happens is you have what's called control points or flow control points that are outside of your land, which is the river and its flow capacity. And basically the water that comes off of your land through this area is backing up here and then basically flooding out this area.
Yes.
Okay. And roughly for how long is this area that's currently in blue flooded?
It is for definitely for 1 month. Like it is um the high the rain is pouring in September, June, July, August, September, and then it gets logged. It's completely gets waterlogged by September end, and till November, it
Okay.
remains like that, 1 to 2 feet till ankle length.
Gotcha.
The land is soaked in water completely.
Okay. All right. So if this were my site, what I would try to do is start to take a look at the high points. And so, looking at your map, it looks like this western side and this southern side, these are sort of the high points here. And then
Yes,
basically
yes.
we've got a few drainages that come down. It looks like we already have an indentation here. We have some drainages that are coming down here as well. And basically what I would do is start from the top of the watershed and start to see where water can be held up high and potentially
Okay,
distributed further to or towards your ridges. So generally when water comes down here, this water will concentrate in these valley forms and then come down here and then concentrate in these valley forms, concentrate here and come down. So that means that generally the water is going to move off of these ridges. Just going to turn this to a lesser thickness. So this water is going to drain off these ridges, drain off these ridges, and drain off these ridges. So from a purely first principles perspective, just looking at it from first principles, what we want to do is try and redistribute this water so that way instead of concentrating consistently in the valleys and contributing to the flooding that's here, we can take some of that water and distribute it across this landscape. Does that make sense in principle?
yes.
Okay. So the structures we have to do that as we go throughout this process are we have things like swales, we have things like dams, we have what's called keyline cultivation, which cultivates off contour predominating the ridge, which I'll explain in a second. So all of those can be potential opportunities for us to hold water in this landscape at a higher level. I'm just going to
Okay.
pop over to, this isn't bad. We might use this one. So knowing what we know and so great that you did that, this model, because it really does give you a good sense of what you're looking at. Knowing what we know about this model, we know that we've got our high points on the southerly and the westerly sides, and that there's opportunity potentially in these drainages to hold water long term. I think the main thing, especially in a tropical situation, is making sure to slow down the water in the drainages. So one of the first things I would think we'd want to be conscientious about is revegetating these drainages as much as possible. So it looks like a fair number of these drainages are either bare or they have some sparse trees. So these would be areas which I would 100% want to be putting into also this area in here, it looks like. So all these areas I'd want to be putting into vegetation as much as possible. And then your major water through line, I'd want to make sure is vegetated as well. And what this does is it basically puts that vegetative sponge directly in the path of water so it can be absorbed. So that's kind of rule one. Um, Rule two is we want to take the longest, most contiguous contour, the highest, most longest contour, and it's probably one of these top threes. It's going to switch color here and go back down to the pen. Um, we'd probably want to trace one of these and just see how far it goes along the entire site. And it might be this one or it might be the one above it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but getting a sense of what the length of that is. That's usually the first line that we're going to put into a full swale across the entire landscape. And it's usually going to point to potentially some areas that might become ponds or impoundments for water that we might be able to keep and use for lower watering or lower irrigation throughout the season. This other aspect that we want to take a look at here, and I'm just going to remove this because I'm going to have to get a bit closer. So as we get closer to the map here, we can explain a little bit about what keyline design is. So keyline design really takes this idea of the inflection point. So the inflection point is where we go from convex to concave. So it's where we go from steep in the valley to starting to flatten out. And it looks like it's generally here. And what we're trying to do is get a pattern first. So notice I'm saying pattern, I'm not saying cultivation, I'm just saying a pattern. So we're just getting a line on the landscape. And what this line on the landscape does is it starts in the valley, and basically, instead of going along contour, it basically moves down and crosses the line. So that way, let's say if we dug a trench here, water that started here would basically move downhill. Now, the reason for this is that if we planted on this contour, or pardon me, on this geometry, if we planted on this geometry, let's say we did it down here as well. So this is one, this is one. So let's say this is generally the line that we're using. We'd probably come in here, probably come in here, come in here, and come in here. Okay, and then I'm gonna erase this other line. So this is not contour planting. This is off contour planting that favors going across contour, but going down slope. What happens is if we plant this, the trees themselves start to act as vegetation, pardon me, a hydration dissemination structure that moves water towards the ridge. And this could be that we do a swale on here as well, but generally we would be working in some kind of structure that, some kind of pattern that would move and create a pattern that would have water start in the valleys and move across to the
The
ridges.
Remedies.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the reason for that, again, just going back to our previous, your great model here, is that because this area, this this area really wants to shed water. So this always wants to shed water all the way across. But instead we want to do is we actually want to have it hold on to water. So what that might look like in actuality is we might have a planting plan that uses this as a guide. So say we start up here in the valley, but this, oh, let's go back to the pen. We start up here in the valley, but we slowly cross down slope, kind of come to here, and then similarly, we come back up slope. So basically, again, if this was a trench, which it's not, but if it was, we put a drop of water here, it would slowly move down slope across the ridge. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, totally.
So
Yes.
that
Yes.
type of pattern of planting on your ridges, I think would be one of the first things I would want to take a look at is how can we set out a line that we can then use? And this is the great thing about keyline planting is that if we took that same line and if it was equidistance, which means the same distance in between, we get this really interesting herringbone shape. And you can see that that line is even more accentuated going up and more accentuated. And what happens is even if you're planting here on a grid pattern, what happens is we get trees that are actually quite symmetrical. And that symmetrical nature also helps to buffet wind, which is one of the major issues of planting on a ridge. You get a lot more wind, but you also get a lot more sun. So we usually see plantings on ridges increase their growing capacity if they get enough water, which is where I would think this type of planting plan for this ridge and then this ridge here and then this ridge here. I think that type of planting plan would work. And then I would take a look at, just going to remove these two. I would take a look at if there's any place in here or here. This already looks like a good indentation. Does this hold a lot of water already?
Yeah, and that's some. I mean, before we bought the land, they dug out a lot of earth, so it is a very big hole,
Ah, but it doesn't hold
which get
water.
yeah, which holds water only during the rains.
Right. Okay. So that might speak to the idea of either seeing if there is clay material that we can find in some of these inflection points. This is the other neat thing about inflection points. So an inflection point here, we can see this slope. I'll switch my colors here. This slope here is pretty much the same slope according to your your diagram or your model, and then it slowly starts to smooth out. So we would say that probably here or here would be the inflection point. And I'd be very curious to dig here to see if there was any clay. Because what happens is when a raindrop hits bare ground, its violent impact breaks apart the sand, the silt, the clay. They get into solution and they start to flow over the landscape. And so you can think of all that water flowing over this landscape and hitting this point and slowing. And so what happens first is you've got the sand that stops, then the silt, then the clay. So we have this potential spot where potentially a fair amount of clay has stopped. And if you have that, you may be able to take that and use that to actually line this area up here, which may or may not have value because it'd be easy enough. There's a bit too much going on. I'm just going to remove this. There's an easy enough way to create a swale all the way across this this area and actually fill this pond naturally. So that way all of this then becomes the roof, if you will, to fill this one pond. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because this ditch, we're going to fill it up because this is where we are planning to make our commercial center
Okay,
for. So because
gotcha.
it takes a lot of land and disturbs the symmetry, but where you're saying that there can be a lot of clay, actually you're very right because there is, I think in that location only there is a natural pond, which
Ah, okay.
which remains filled during even during the dry season, which is not dried even now.
Perfect. Perfect. And similarly, this area here, we're kind of steep and then it gets a little shallow. This would be another spot. I would probably do some excavation and here as well.
Yeah.
Similarly over here, it looks like this spot might have value. So I think all of these spots would be good to excavate because once you have a sense of where the ponds are going to go, that then creates the background or the infrastructure for the rest of the design system. Because say we decide that this is the spot for the pond, let's say that this turns out well. This
Okay.
contour, pardon me, my mouse drawing is out of practice after vacation. So this contour goes all the way across the landscape here. And again, this can then become the fill to then fill this potential pond. And then usually what we would do is we do an overflow on the ridge. And so you could do an overflow here. And if you kept this contour, this is hard to see if this is right. I'd probably then do another overflow here. So that way, if this pond ever filled up to the point of overflow, which it would in your climate and your precipitation values, they would overflow here and here. And then if you ended up having a secondary pond lower down, hopefully there would be another, let's say we decide to do something maybe even here, because it looks like a good spot. It would likely pick up that overflow between these two sections, and then it would fill up again. And then in between here, you could do that same keyline patterning we were talking about. Yeah. So that same keyline patterning on the trees that are downslope, just to maximize as much water as you can. So all of those things help to keep that water as high up in the landscape as possible, put it into vegetation. The vegetation is completely up to you and your client objectives. If you're looking to increase forests, if you're looking to increase orchards, if you're looking to increase timber wood or medicinal wood or fiber wood, it really depends on your site and what it is you want to see happening. But I think that would be the general shape of what I would start to play with to see if it's valuable. The thing about oh, it's great because you just duplicated this. So if I click here, yeah, perfect. The thing about your flooding is the mechanism of the flooding is off your site. You literally can't affect what's happening and how that water is being created. It's very similar to Nathan's situation, actually. So what I would probably look at instead is how could we utilize this flooded area and how can we plant it out with semi-flooded types of plants that enjoy that type of flooded environment? How can we make sure that we don't put any major infrastructure down there because we know it's always going to get flooded? So keep the infrastructure out of there. Is there any type of animal rearing or anything like that that could be useful in an area that's get flooded? Those would be the type of questions I would use because you just can't solve that problem because the size of your land doesn't include where the problem begins. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. So the Hugelkultur, that makes any sense in this waterlogged area because there's a
No,
lot
so the
of.
thing about hugels is that anything over a month, basically with hoogs. So I'm just gonna scroll up or down to get some space. Here we go. So the problem with waterlogged hugelkulturs is that hugelkulturs are inherently a terrestrial space. So they want to have air. So we've got a trench, we've got a mound, and we've got wood in the center, basics. Now, the reason why hugelkultur works is that this wood decomposes into soil, but it also has air. It has interstitial airspace, which allows all the microorganisms to live. If that area gets waterlogged, what'll happen is this whole area will be underwater and this will all go anaerobic. It'll go aquatic anaerobic and will probably go quite funky if it's there for, more than a day, let's say. If it's a day, it's no
Oh.
problem. But if it's a month, it's going to be a bit of a problem. You're going to have a very different environment. So I could see, in terms of like thinking about what should go where, going back to our ideas here, I could see hugelkulturs kind of in the upper area, no problem. But hugelkulturs take a lot of time and energy. Like it's a lot of energy to dig, it's a lot of energy to bring the wood over, it's a lot of energy to put the wood inside, and it's a lot of energy to put the soil on top and then to plant it. So, in intensive areas near the houses or the commercial centers, makes sense. I think generally further out, you're going to want to go with sort of a zone 3-4 mechanism, something like a swale or a key line planting guide, which is less of hands-on for you guys.
Right. Right.
Which will also reduce the labor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. It's a
Thank you.
fascinating site. And I think if you just start to say, how can I capture the water that's coming in the drainages and capture it well? And then with the excess water, how can the overflow go to something useful? I think that then creates the entire plan pretty quickly and simply. And then anything else within this drainage where you can do semi-flow through structures, things like one rock dams or jackfall dams, things where we're just putting in a lot of material where water can still flow through, but can actually hold back sedimentation. You'll just get these little pockets, as I'm sure you saw down here with a permanent pond, that can help to revitalize some of the drier areas as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's a great site and you guys have a great vision for it. I think you're well on your way.
Yeah. And there are no permaculture experts in the area at all. They
Oh, okay.
don't they don't talk about, they only talk about conventional, either you plant the cashew agriculture or just one. There's no diversity in like that. They don't talk about that.
Yeah.
They don't know, they're not talking about mulching, nothing. Like the neighbors. Yeah, so it's
Well, it's a great problem to have because you'll very quickly become the expert in your area as you start to apply things slowly, methodically. The thing is with the site as big as yours, you really have to start small and work a lot of observation so that way you can really read the landscape well. It's really easy to get overwhelmed and think we're going to go big right off the bat. But if you can start even small and slow in some of these areas where you just figure out how to slow and stop the water, how to absorb that water, how to put it to functional use, then within a year or two, you can expand that nucleated design into something quite large. But the big thing I can say, having done this a few times and having made mistakes going too big too quickly, is just take it slow, have your plan, do a small implementation of your plan so you can see a little example and see how it looks in a year or 2 years time. The great thing about the tropics is everything grows so fast. You get such immediate feedback. That's harder to do in the temperate climates. It's hard to get people to wait 5 years to see if something born out because they want to know if it works. But especially for your situation, there's so much to do here that you could even do things in miniature. You could do like, a queen size bed pond that you dig by hand to really get a sense of, oh, when I fill it up this way, it will overflow the banks unless I make this swale that has an overflow, that has
Oh,
forgotten the word of it all of a sudden here, level sill spillway, which we talk about in the course. Andrew's got some
mm,
great information about it, but basically, if you do that in miniature, then you can scale that up. And so what I would recommend is that first year, really make it about your education, taking the theoretical you learned in the course, grabbing a shovel, grabbing a pick, grabbing somebody who you can coerce or cajole into helping you, and then building small structures and going, okay, this does hold water. This does overflow. If I made this 10 times as big, this would still work, because that's the difference, is that the principle has to be sound to get solid on it. And then after that, you can scale up.
right, right. I
Yeah.
understand it. I'll keep this in mind.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome, Shawani.
Yeah.
Nathan, you got a few questions about the berm. Go for it.
Yeah, basically, I just sent you a grayscale copy of my base map. So when you were looking at my land earlier, you basically said you'd berm and dike along the west and south boundary there.
Yeah.
We've actually started that because we
Nice.
have all this material on our land to use. We had this huge piles, so we've already started along the west and along the southern boundary, but we're going to need some more material brought in. I was just wondering, like, a berm is a pretty straight up thing to me. It's kind of like a small hill, and we're just going to plant the shit out of it with bamboo.
Mm-hmm. Is the berm made of soil, or is the berm made of soil and wood?
There's some wood in the soil right now, but the material that we're bringing in won't have any wood in it.
Okay. Yeah. So generally, if it's a pure berm, then you
Yeah,
can plant into it. And basically, I would plant any of the pioneers in your area, specifically the nitrogen fixing pioneers. So
yeah,
any sort of live staking there that you could then develop into a very vegetative berm, because when it floods again, what'll
yeah,
happen is it'll come up through that material, and eventually, it doesn't matter how much water you get, you always get a wave effect, right?
yeah,
And that wave effect will erode the side of the berm unless there's some sort of living rebar that's holding the soil together, like
yeah,
your trees. Now,
yeah,
at the bottom of that, if you do have large rocks on the out-hand side, the out of the west and out of the south, you can
yeah,
start to pile up big rocks as riprap, riparian armament that will help
yeah.
to break that wave effect. And that will reduce the amount of water that flows through. It won't
Mhm.
completely stop, because that becomes one of the major issues in your situation, is that, again, like Shawani, your control point is below you. The control
Yeah,
point for the water that could flood you out is below you. So you can't do much about that. You basically have to flood out on that section, and that'll happen regardless of what you do. So that means, how do you put that to productive use? How do you catch and store a flood, is kind of the kind of crazy question we have in front of us. Years ago, I got asked to the site. They called it Rise Over Run Farm because it was so steep. And it was in a place that got 2.4 meters of rain a year. So it got a huge amount of rain, and they were growing chickens. And the question they gave me was, can we turn water into chickens? It's kind of a biblical request. And you can do it if you start to think, well, what do chickens eat? Chickens will eat certain types of tree fodder and berries and shrubs. So what if we turn the whole section of this farm into a water retention zone and just develop these water retention structures that would then do that? So in your situation, I think, planting out, there are some willow analogs. There's definitely a number of nitrogen fixers that you can plant there. But I think all of that would just create also a great break for you. Sun gets hot down there, so anything you can do to create more shade is also going to be a positive for any of the understory you want to grow.
oh yeah. So this berm seems to, like, it wants to take the shape of like 245-degree angles on each side with a flat top.
Yeah,
Now, will we plant the flat top and the sides?
yeah, 100%. And
Yeah.
I would plant the sides towards the river or the flood first.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are you're going to get more water from that side as well. And then I would basically, if this were I,
Mm-hmm.
um, so just so we're generally thinking along the same line. So generally we're thinking sort of berm like this. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. we've actually extended pretty much all the way to the top of the western boundary there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you do have a little valley here, so chances are in rains you're going to get a little bit of water pressure this way as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, sorry, I just want to, before you keep going, on the southern side, because of that road that runs along the boundary there,
Yep.
it's above the land. So when we berm, we're actually creating a channel, if you know what I mean,
Oh yeah.
between that back side of the road and our berm. Now I'm thinking that could be a good thing.
So the last time it flooded, did you lose the road? I thought you told me that it flooded again recently and they lost the road.
Well, so the road, you can kind of see it's right where your mouse is.
Yeah.
Like that kind of got the bank of that kind of got washed out, and the road is now in right where your mouse is, about 3 inches wide.
Okay.
But it's still quite a large bank. So if you were to stand there and look down, you're talking about 15, 17 feet down to the bottom
Okay.
of the bed.
Okay, so in that case, I would probably use the road as my first line of defense, and then I would make the berm beside it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking too. But it creates this natural channel, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so it'd be like the road would be here, your berm
Yep.
would be here, and there would be
Yep.
this channel. And then probably if that's the case, so if this is the channel here,
Yep.
I'd probably do like little one rock dams or just little areas, because what'll happen is that this will channelize water and it will create channelization, canyonization over time. So basically it'll incise this further and further and further. And so part of the building of the berm then becomes building these little structures in between. So that way the water slows in one section, flows through, slows, flow through, slows. And again, planting that channel, just like Shawani, planting the drainages will be number one priority.
So nitrogen fixing pioneer species
Yep.
and bamboo, because you see bamboo just all along this road here.
And the great thing is that there's so many timber bamboo species in Ecuador that will grow so well for you there, especially because they have full sun and they have water. So that can just turn into structure for you in terms of either building materials or, wood lot if you decide to do things like biochar or starting to build more timber framed or timber materials. So, yeah.
Absolutely. No, okay, that's good. We're on the same page then.
Yeah.
So yeah, because we're looking to plant because of the season that we're in right now. The garua should be here by May or June, where it gets cloudy and a little bit dry, but then misty at the same time.
Yeah.
And we're like gonna plant because it's so sunny right now. It wouldn't make any sense, and I'll start watering it, so it'll grow pretty fast, I imagine, this berm.
Yeah, and I think, generally working with, there's a couple of type of planting structures you can work with. So one way to do this, depending on the angle of repose of the material, is if you're worried about erosion just because of the angle of repose, which is the angle that a material naturally rests at, you can do little structures in between it. So you can kind of create these little structures that, if this becomes three-dimensional, all of a sudden, you make these little uprights with material that can self-stake. So bamboo does that. There's a lot of the nitrogen fixtures that'll do that down here. And then you put a couple of branches behind it, and that just helps hold the bank back while it's planting. And then after that, if this is material that is plantable, great. If not, then you just plant in between this. Usually going in a grid pattern. So kind of going in a hexagon pattern.
Okay.
And what happens is this type of pattern of planting on this type of slope, it will help the roots in between here interact with each other and create a nice net in between these different planting stakes.
That's beautiful. And you would do that on the top of the berm as well, the same type of
I would do it
pattern?
on both sides, and then the top, be conscientious of view once you get to the top, because you've increased the amount of space and time. So this may be more shrub you want to put on here.
Okay.
So you may actually want to do shrubs kind of on the corners, so that way you've got space on the top to walk as sort of a parapet across and around the land. So you may want to think right off the bat, is this something we want to traverse? And if so, we may want to just have shrubs on the outside, trees at the
Mhm.
bottom. So
Yeah.
that way we kind of have this little private walkway that goes around the side.
I really like that idea. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to what Bill Mollison said, is that we're time scouts. You know,
Yeah.
we're permaculture designers. We design in that fourth dimension of time. So we have to think, what does this look like long term? What's happening below ground and above ground? And again, as usual, this is the plan we think is going to happen. No plan survives first implementation. And
Yeah.
we just have to take that feedback. And this is where, same thing with Shawani, do a small little experiment, see what it looks like, see how it expands upon itself, see how it propagates. And if, as Sepp Holzer, one of my mentors, used to say, if you've read the book of nature right, then exponentially expand upon it. If you've read the book of nature wrong, which is 8 or 9 times out of 10, go back to the book and read again and go, oh, I didn't read that properly. I see what I'm seeing now. Like, I just drove by a place in Cuenca and there was a beautiful flower. And I was like, oh, it's such a nice hedging flower. And it looks like it's got nectar flow year round, looked like it would be great pollinator habitat. And so I grabbed a photo of it, threw it on the local gardening group, being like, does anybody know what this is? And it's Ecuador. They're very enterprising. So not only did I get the Latin name, and then I got 3 offers for me to go and purchase the plant or the seed from somebody
Oh
who's
yeah, I
a
bet you
part of that
did.
group. But what was immediately apparent to me was it was drought tolerant because the city doesn't do a lot of maintenance. But my big question was spread. How much does it spread? And so that brought me into the conversation with the rest of the group there, just saying, what's the spread like? When does it become aggressive? Is it always pretty passive? All those types of questions you want to ask, because the burden's on the designer. Once you put that plant in place, you really need to know what it's going to do and how it's going to take over. The great thing about bamboo is you're already by a river. The bamboo there is already naturalized, so it's not an issue about that says. It doesn't necessarily nitrogen fix. They tell me there's 1 or 2 bamboos that nitrogen fix. I still haven't seen it. So you'll want to intersplice that with a fair amount of pioneer nitrogen fixing pioneer species that you can live stake, where you can cut, drop in
Yeah.
a branch, because that's a huge amount of planting. And if you were going to buy all that material, it'll be problematic. But if you go down the river and harvest from whatever the convention is, I think in Ecuador, I was just talking with a buddy of mine, I think it's 25 feet from the river is public space. So
Mhm.
you can go in and you can harvest bundles upon bundles of material to then plant out as you go along.
Oh, I think I see the exact plant I do it too. It's got this ginormous leaf, and I can never get the name right. It starts with a G. They call it, but again, I don't know if that's what just the locals call it, or
Yeah, go to
what.
the gardening Ecuador gardening expats group on Facebook.
Okay.
Give it a post and say, hey, I've got this plant. I'm really interested. Also, I'm looking for nitrogen fixing pioneer species that can be live staked. Does anybody know of any?
Okay.
Specifically, I'm in Ayampa. I'm near Ayampa, and
Yeah.
looking for those types of species, because that's how I start in any area. Like, I just start asking questions. I try to fill out my successional bracket first. Like, what are my successional plants? Because if you work on the succession first, everything comes easy after that, because
Mhm.
the successional process in your environment wants to turn. Like, that flywheel wants to turn. So if you start with succession, instead of being the dumb designer that's like, I'm just going to start with the climax species and hope it works, it's like you're skipping 5 to 10 years and you're thinking, oh, it'll be fine. It's like, if you can create the conditions first to develop that sequential conversation, develops really quickly. And because you're primarily wanting colonization to stabilize that bank and give you flood protection as early as possible, you want those pioneers.
Yeah.
And if you're worried about protection, this is kind of the last piece there. I'm just going to go back here and go back to the drawing, which is now gone. If you go back to protection,
Mhm.
hold on. What are you doing? There we go. So, we've got our berm here and our berm here, and it looks like this. So again, this is A and this is A apostrophe. So this is A, the outside, A
Mhm.
apostrophe, river's down here.
Yep.
Once you've got your bamboos in and your nitrogen fixers and all those good things, so you've got your bamboo and your nitrogen fixers, let's make them purple for the sake of argument, so we know we're talking about two different ones. Then at the bottom third, you could overplant with your protection species. So these are going to be your prickly, your poisonous, your thorny, and you could
Mhm.
literally create more of an impenetrability to help improve the security of your site as well.
I would
So
like that very much so.
yeah, so generally I don't know all the plants in Ecuador yet.
Mhm.
Generally Kai apple, there's a version of Kai apple the world over, big heavy thorns, generally great as live staking and generally easy to weave together when it's young because you can then cross them and cross them again. Same thing we would do if we were hedge laying, like in the UK. But that type of hedge, let's say we turned it to a color that we could see. Let's call it orange for a second here. So that
Yeah.
kind of hedge kind of becomes the bottom, and then you're into your bamboo, alder, nitrogen fixation plants kind of coming up the slope there.
I love it.
Just in terms of your planting order.
Got you. Very valuable. Thank you so much. Very
Yeah, between the
valuable.
two of us, we'll have to build the permaculture plant book for Ecuador.
That'd be cool.
There is a permaculture group on Facebook that's in
In
Spanish. So
Ecuador?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I
Let me
know they
find.
have Quito.
What's that?
I know they have a permaculture program in Quito, or my friend was telling me about it. So it
Okay.
is known.
Yeah, it's there's a bunch in Vilcabamba I've seen this far.
Okay.
There's a bunch in and around the cloud forest of Ecuador or of Quito. And then there's two sites. One's like fruit only eating. It's got more of a ideology to it.
Oh,
But the other ones, yeah, they're there. Oh, that's why I'm doing it's permacultura. Should have known that better. Should have known. Permacultura Ecuador. There we go. Yeah, I'll throw it into the chat there for you.
sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Reason number 451 why learning the language is so important.
Yeah. So I've been a long road, but I'm finally I feel much more confident speaking Spanish.
Good, good. I got pulled away my first and my 3 months into just a couple months ago. I got pulled away a ton, having to go back and take care of things. So this is my next big project is get a handle on the language. And there's this great book that a buddy of mine put out. It's called Field Glossary, Terms for Sustainable Development and Ecological Agriculture. I'm going to put that up there. And it's
And Spanish?
in Spanish to English. Yeah.
Is that online?
Yeah. So understory.org is the name of it. And it comes in this waterproof guide,
Oh,
but
I need that.
it's excellent. I picked it up when I was working in Cuba years ago, and then I grabbed a couple of copies thinking, oh, this is great to have. I stopped working in Cuba, and all of a sudden I find myself down in Ecuador. But like it's things like thatch, dry season, wet
Yeah,
season,
I just went
crumbly,
to it.
bread nut. It's got a lot of plant species names. It doesn't have them put in any way, shape, or form, but it's also like done into like construction terms, and then it goes over into like plants and plantas, and yeah, it's a great book. So yeah, understory.org is the
Hope
website
they,
there.
I hope they deliver to Ecuador.
I really wanted to see if they had an electronic version, but if I remember correctly, when I looked at it, they hadn't turned it electronic yet. But
Oh,
yeah, this is a great one.
right
Yeah,
on.
highly recommend this. And it's totally translated from the beginning to the end, which is excellent. And then there's a couple of kind of general guides that have been translated into Spanish as well. But if you're already in English, it doesn't matter because you're already getting your education in English.
Yeah, right on.
Cool, guys. Well, we got to the hour pretty easily. That was nice. Thanks for the questions. And if you have any further questions, let me know. Something that came up in our previous class, which was kind of surprising, is that people just didn't take note of when their final assignments were due. So I just really want to make the point here again that June 3rd at 9 a.m., your final assignment, all resubmissions are due. So just keep that in mind and spread the word far and wide. I had 3 people who they just didn't look at the due dates. And then I was on vacation. They emailed me. They're like, "What do you mean it's not due when it's normally due?" It's like, what are you talking about? Every 2 weeks, 20 weeks.
Did you get my submission? Sorry about being life just happened so crazy all at once.
I'm just getting back to marking today. So
Okay, you'll see it then.
yeah, I popped out for vacation right as break started, and then I came back and I got what my husband had. So I've been on the couch for a week and I'm so done with it.
Oh, geez. Rest up.
So done. But thanks, guys. It was great,
Yep.
great seeing you both. If you have any other questions, if you need any other help, feel free to email. And all the best. Looking forward to seeing you folks in a couple weeks.
Ciao.
Yeah, take care. Bye now.